Hey fearsome friends, tonight we're delving into the deep dark woods. Stories on this subject for me have been hard to come by, so I hope you enjoy what I have found. Also, stories 6 and 7 both have second parts that I will notify you about when they're coming. They should remind you though to always keep your wits about you. So sit back, relax, and remember, keep being creepy. I moved to Seattle from Kansas about 5 years ago. I'm one of those tech bros all you locals are always complaining have ruined your city. Well, I guess it's my city now. Sorry about that. Now, one of my favorite things about the Pacific Northwest is the mountains. I try to get away from the city as often as I can, so when I found this cabin on the Skykomish River, I decided I would treat myself to a midweek getaway in the early fall. I arrived this morning. The cabin was very cozy, tucked away among the trees next to the riverbanks. There was a hot tub on the back deck, and Wi-Fi for us tech bros who only like the facade of roughing it. I put my bags on the bed and decided I'd explore inside before I explored out. There was an extensive DVD collection, but mostly romantic comedies and family movies. Magazines from 5 years ago littered the coffee tables. In a little nook in the bedroom, I found a basket containing a few notebooks and local travel guides. The notebooks were, according to the labels, for guest notes. I smirked and laid down with the most recent one. I'd probably get a kick out of this. It was mostly what I expected. People talking about their kids and their dogs, and how much they loved the hot tub and the river. Pretty boring. I flipped through the book until I got to the most recent entries. It looked like the last guests had written a few pages. 10th of the 10th, 2020, 10 p.m. The noises started at around 8:30 tonight. At first we thought it was just the rain. We never should have read that book that we found in the woods. Reading this, my eyes widened and I looked more closely at the page. This was a little bit more interesting than the white bread entries before. It continued. Well, maybe read is the wrong word. There wasn't enough in any language we understood to actually read. It was nothing but weird symbols and grotesque drawings, except on the very last page, which read in English. When darkness overtakes the day, that's when old Goo-Goo likes to play. Teeth so sharp, eyes so red, once you see him, you're good as dead. Okay, pretty weird, but whatever. These noises though, we thought it was dripping rain, but it isn't the right cadence. It sounds more like licking, and every so often there is a crunching sound. Maybe it's just our imaginations. We aren't used to the forest after all. It's so dark and quiet, so every sight or sound seems magnified. As I was closing the curtains in the bedroom, it looked like something was standing at the riverbank. Something vaguely human, but with large horns and big wings folded behind it. My husband says it was a tree, but when I looked back, it was gone. Time for bed now. I hope I can sleep. The noises haven't stopped. I chuckled. Clearly someone was getting into the Halloween spirit and having some fun with it. Still, I looked up and through the window in the bedroom at the raging river beyond, and I did feel a little uneasy. The sun was starting to set, and the big picture windows did give the impression that someone or something could be watching from the woods. I got up and closed the curtains before continuing to read, just to ease my mind. 11th of the 10th, 2020, 7:45 a.m. The bed in this cabin is wonderfully comfortable. My husband slept like a rock. I, however, kept dreaming about a horned creature standing at the corner of the bedroom, staring at me. My husband said it was just a dream, but when I got up this morning, all of the curtains were opened. My husband says he didn't touch them and that I must have left them open last night, but I know I didn't. At least the noises have stopped. We plan to enjoy the hot tub and relax today. 11th of the 10th, 2020, 2:10 p.m. We spent the last hour in the hot tub. Very nice, but I kept seeing something darting among the trees. Even back inside, I feel like I'm being watched. My husband thinks I'm going crazy. Maybe I am. Yeah, I think you probably are too. Maybe drink some beer and chill out. This page has started out with the same neat, tight writing of the entry before, but as it went on, the writing became larger and more erratic, slanting across the page. The last entry on the page was the most haphazard looking. 11th of the 10th, 2020, 8 p.m. The noises are back now, but there's chanting too. My husband says it's the neighbours, but it isn't a language we know. I see glowing red lights in the woods, and I'm afraid to close my eyes. My husband says I'm overreacting, but I don't think I can trust him anymore. Chanting? No, I was really sure this was a joke. However, I strained my own ears in the quiet of the cabin and listened. The sun had definitely gone down now, but it was still raining. I could hear dripping outside, and maybe if you were losing your mind, it did sound a little bit like licking. I admit that I gasped when I turned the page, even if it was all a joke. The next pages were barely legible, scribbles and symbols and nonsense. I will try to write it the best way I can for you. 12th of the 10th, 2020, 8 a.m. I'm supposed to go home this morning. I can't believe I stayed in the woods all by myself all weekend. All this alone time made me a little paranoid. I'm packing the book I found. It is still wet for some reason, like it has been in the rain all weekend. Actually, on second thoughts, I don't think I will leave. I want to stay here forever. I want to become one with old Gugu. The bottom third of that page was just odd symbols that I have never seen before. The next and final page was simply Gugu, written over and over again, covering the entire page. I rolled my eyes and closed the guest book. Very funny people. I got up and tossed it back into the basket with the other books, then rifled through them to see if there was anything good that I'd missed. Maybe something better than this fake monster story. Behind the travel guides was a small, leather book that I hadn't noticed before. Curious, I picked it up. It was strangely wet, like it had been in the rain all weekend. I'm a photographer, and I've had success, being featured in everything from Farrier's Journal to National Geographic and National Geographic Kids. One particular dream of mine has been to travel to Iceland in October to see and photograph the aurora borealis. I'd recently come out to my family as gay, and to put it mildly, they weren't accepting. Knowing this had been a tremendous weight on my shoulders, my partner Evan surprised me with plane tickets to travel to my dream destination in late September of 2017. As we made our descent to Reykjavik Airport, we admired with awe the wet, craggy subarctic dreamscape and marvelled over the contrast of glaciers against active volcanoes spurting out magma into the air just underneath our plane, with bold shades of red that I never thought possible to exist in nature. We rented an old, quaint little home for the week, just on the outskirts of Reykjavik. The dense, lush forest nearby grew mysterious berries of every colour on the spectrum, and sprouted enormous mythical mushrooms so thick they need to be cut down with a hatchet. It was a child's utopia, missing only a family of gnomes foraging alongside bears and foxes. We hiked until we found an open space outside of the woods atop a wet, mossy cliff which opened up to glaciers out in the seabed, waves smashing and colliding with glossy slabs of smooth onyx, prevailing to a big open sky waiting the brilliant, incandescent phenomena of auroras to touch down. I took a spare camera and set it up on a stand overnight so that I could procure for myself gorgeous time-lapse footage of one of the most mysterious and beautifully thrilling occurrences of nature. After sitting a while, holding each other and taking in the view, The two of us retired back to the Airbnb for the night. The next morning I trekked back through 2 miles of forest to retrieve my camera. Evan had already left for his morning run, so when I came back to the harbour, I sat with my camera and decided to look through the footage I'd recorded. So there I sat, so calm and rested from my jet-lag slumber last night, inhaling the fresh air, elated to be residing in such a primitive, magical corner of the earth, and everything seemed to be moving in slow motion, unlike the anxious bustle of the American cityscape. I set my camera to time-lapse and began reviewing the footage. 5:01 to 5:44 p.m. Sun sets down over the horizon. 5:44 to 7:59 p.m. Brilliance of brightening infinite twinkling of stars, fading to neon green and pink hues of the northern lights. 10:18 p.m. Camera shakes and footage suddenly cuts to black. No way a fully charged GoPro runs out of battery life this quickly. 1:21 a.m. Timestamp on screen when camera cuts back on, and this is when I impulsively scream. I'm watching a first-person POV inside of a small, unkept house or apartment, lazily navigating from room to room. What? I immediately pause the footage and jump to my feet, turning to face the dark forest and backing up slowly towards the edge of the cliff as my heart begins to palpitate and I gasp for air. An anxiety attack is coming on. My vulnerability is the first thought that comes to mind. Slowly I pick the camera back up to my face and hit play. I'm watching what looks at first to be a tour of a very dirty apartment, garbage piled on the floors to such an extent that the carpet is unseen. The slow pace of the cameraman seems deliberate, and each time a corner is rounded, my pulse begins to accelerate. My muscles tense and my hand balls into a tight fist as I'm bracing for something. The rooms are dark aside from the first. No furniture, lamps on the floor along with everything else. It's grainy and hard to see, but now I'm watching the person begin to make their ascent up a flight of stairs with walls on each side, very tight and claustrophobic. I can see a light on at the top. The steps move nonchalant, slowly, very slowly. I stopped it once more, hyperventilating, and begin to scan my surroundings. Someone followed us last night through the forest. We were being watched the entire time, in what was basically the middle of nowhere. I tossed the camera in my backpack and grabbed a hold of an extremely sharp piece of dried basalt rock and made a run for it into the dense woodland in between me and the house. The branches crunched and crackled, and I felt eyes on me as the bird's song halted. This person, or people, knew I'd be back for my camera. I just sprinted the entire time, hearing thumps and cracks in unison with mine. I caught my foot in a root and stumbled forward with a sprain radiating to my throbbing fingertips, and this is when I heard it. The trees were organized more spaciously now as the converging canopies obscured the sun from the natural box I was trapped inside of. The searing pain in my swelling ankles ceased within my body when I heard a noise, a rustling in the bushes behind me. They were moving. As I awaited my doom, it finally prevailed. 2 bunnies scampered out, squeaking and chasing each other in circles. I sighed and stood to my feet. I could see movement just ahead, dark shadows moving amongst the trees. I now can jaunt relatively quietly on the mossy ground beneath my feet, meaning somebody else could do the same, just as silently. As I survey the woods, I keep feeling like I'm seeing movement, but when I look, nothing is there. The trees are massive, and anyone could easily conceal themselves. No more analyzing. I perilously limped my way back to the residence, unlocked the door and ran inside, crying out for Evan as I slammed the door shut and locked it. Nothing. It's now 11:22 a.m. He was gone when I awoke at 8:45, and he's been gone at least 3 hours now. Where the hell is he? I made sure to lock all the doors and check all the rooms, blade in hand, before returning to the living room to watch the rest of the video. Evan can just knock when he decides to finally bring his ass home. As of now, I am an unarmed, defenseless, admittedly effeminate gay weakling trapped alone in a tiny cottage. I know this sounds pathetic, myself being a man and all, but Evan is the masculine power in this relationship. I seek him out for protection. I've needed protection mostly all my life. In high school, I had girls fighting my fights, looking out for me. I was the effete, easy-to-bully faggot of my graduating class. I feared I'd never outlive this designation, always open to attacks. This was a theme in my life until Evan came along, and now he's not here. I'm so angry with him, and at the same time silently begging he come home. In any event, I was finally prepared to hit play once again. I didn't want to watch, but at the same time I had no choice. The footage began where it left off, the camera operator ascending a tight, contained corridor of stairs, cigarette butts tossed onto the carpeted steps. So far I'd not seen or heard much of anything, aside from the dreadful sound of heavy breathing, which I'm only now noticing. The light sound of footsteps, and what sounded like a muffled television somewhere out of view in this house. And coughing. Constantly. A really raspy phlegm-filled cough. As they neared the top, I can audibly hear the terrifying whisper of snickering coming from the cameraman, followed by more phlegmy coughing. Menacing hushed laughter. As the camera rounds the corner at the top, I pause it and throw it down on the couch. I can't do this, I tell myself out loud. Paused in mid-motion, it seems like I'm looking at a blurry picture of another person. I'm mortified. I take a deep breath. God, where are you, Evan? Out there willy-nilly running around Reykjavik, making a ton of new friends. I sit with my arms crossed, leering at my camera, shaking, terrified to even touch it. I wait for several minutes with my arms crossed to my chest, working up the courage to press the play button once again. The person filming crosses a large open room, TV on the floor attached to an Xbox, next to a scattered, empty plastic red cups and a bottle of some type of liquor, cigarette butts everywhere, before entering a dark hallway. Nothing but blackness for several seconds, until I see a hand extended out, pushing open a door. And lying in the middle of the floor is a huge black barrel. The man behind the camera moves closer, and finally removes the lid. Inside is a person sitting with short, curly brown hair. Oh Jesus, it can't be. When the person looks up at the camera, I scream at the top of my lungs. Evan. The man pulls him up violently by his hair. He's naked, covered in red marks, cuts and bruises, and his hands are taped behind his back. One eye is swollen completely shut, and there's a deep, bloody gash on his head. I can see the grey sweatpants that he wore to bed last night, lying on the floor in the corner. With a heavy accent, the man begins to speak. Tell him what you want, the man yells, coughing fits in between. The man rips the tape from Evan's mouth as he grits his teeth in pain and tears. Through the blood being spat from his mouth, I can see Evan is missing teeth. Tell him, you faggot. Tell him what you want, the man screams, backhanding him across the face. The man pulls a blonde wig down over Evan's head and takes a lit cigarette and puts it out on his face. Evan finally mustered the strength to speak. Please stop, I can't take any more, followed by another backhand to the face. The man sits the camera on the floor and knees Evan in the gut, causing him to collapse to the ground. Then something happens to cause me to fall to the floor and weep. The man finally shows himself. He's masked and very large. He pins Evan to the ground and sloppily draws lipstick on his face and writes something on his head. The man goes back to grab the camera and bring it back over to Evan. Evan is sobbing with humiliation and out of breath, gasping for air. He is lying on his face before being pulled around again, painfully by the ear, and the camera zooms in on the word on his head. It reads, Sodom. The man then points the camera at himself and says the most emotionally destructive thing I've ever heard. You brought him here. He suffers for you. Want him back? Then go to the same place near the beach by 8, and you have him back. Before the camera goes black one final time, I collapsed to the fetal position on the floor and wept for a period of time that I couldn't quantify. After passing out on the floor for at least 45 minutes, I have no choice but to contact the police. Half an hour later, a cruiser shows up outside, and 2 young cadets come to the door, along with a man in plain clothes, roughly 30s, with a short beard, a detective. They watch through the footage as I sit across the room, still shaking. Still quietly weeping, they ask me into the kitchen, and the detective sits across from me. He explains that normally a missing person investigation never moves forward until at least 3 days, but because of the footage they have to act immediately. For my protection, I'm brought into the station. They probably know you've contacted us. We're going to put men in plain clothes on the water at dusk and at each end of the forest. Because of the timestamps on the footage, we will sweep in all directions, a walking distance of 3 hours. I sat on a couch at the police station just waiting. 7:30 now. I wished I could have seen it. Seen the moment they beat this guy to the ground and bring Evan back to me. They told me they'd send an officer back to the meeting spot at exactly 8. The seconds went by, one by one, agonizingly slow. 7:31 now. This is going to be a long night. There was one officer in the same room as me, typing on his laptop. All was quiet. I looked at the officer and he glanced at me. All I wanted was assurance. Hey, I begin. Sorry to bother you. No, it's all right, the man says in a typically thick Icelandic accent. I continue. I'm guessing these cases don't end well, do they? He glanced at me sympathetically. Always hold on to hope, he said, and then he began coughing. My brow furrowed. I glanced over at him again, and he shoots me another quick look before rather speedily getting out of his chair. Bathroom break, he says, as he exits the room. And then I noticed it. Maybe it's all in my head, but as soon as he leaves, I audibly hear the officer, a large, robust man, hacking his lungs out as he continues down the hall. This is when I begin falling inside. Turbulence. My heart begins racing. I stand up and quickly flee the room. I pull out my phone, but there's no reception. I sneak past the desk clerk before she catches me. Hello? She says, obviously trying to get my attention. Hey, sorry, I'm just really stressed. I need a smoke. She nods affirmatively in silence. And, just as I see the officer turn the corner, I push open the door to the station and run across the street, hiding behind a tree. I see the officer run out and begin to look around nervously, scanning the area, head swiveling back and forth. Another cough. It's him. I can feel it in my bones. He runs back inside. I call the station and ask to speak to the detective. I explain who I am, and they ask where I'm located. I simply scream at the man, telling him the situation, and beg to speak to the detective, but the call cuts out. Phone is dying. I continue watching from a distance as the officer runs outside to his police cruiser and peels out of the parking lot. I wait for over an hour. It's now 8:55 p.m. Dark. I'm still in the woods, half hoping I don't get attacked by a bear from behind. 9:05, 9:15, 9:40, 10:10, 10:25. Finally, at 11:17, the police vehicles all return at once. I feel I'm safe. There's nothing this man can do to me in front of others. I approach the vehicles, and I run to the detective and collapse to my knees in the middle of the parking lot. "Please," I scream. "Please tell me something good." He helps me up, puts his hands on my shoulders and looks me square in the eyes. "You're very lucky. Evan is very lucky." I break down into tears. I'm brought into the station, back into the same room. Maybe I have this all mixed up, I tell myself. "Where is he?" I ask. "In hospital. He's alive, but unconscious. He'd been through much trauma." Other officers came pouring in, followed by the big guy, the one who coughs, the one who ran off. The detective gestures for him to come forward. The big officer looks down at me sympathetically again. "Thank this man," says the detective. "Officer Ragnar found your friend in the woods, injured badly, and phoned us." "The woods? What about the house?" "Yes, we found the house. Vacant apartment of Kiltred Street. Unfortunately, it was on fire when we got there, so not much we can work with there. But your boy, he'll live." I put my head down and stared at my feet. "I know this is a sensitive issue," said the detective, "but I think you owe Officer Ragnar a little gratitude." I looked into his eyes of pure evil. Yes, thanks, officer," I said in a dejected tone. The detective exited the room. Officer Ragnar followed, but not before putting his fist into his mouth, coughing loudly, and then shooting me a smirk. Then he left. Evan spent 2 weeks in the hospital. He sustained severe trauma to the head, had 8 of his teeth extracted, and retained scars all over from cigarette burns. He said he heard a noise that night in the living room. He got out of bed as I was asleep and was hit over the head. He woke up in a barrel. He wouldn't tell me the rest. He just cried on my shoulder. He said the man was masked, and finally I could be here for him. Not just because I held him, but because I snuck a few cigarette butts undiscovered into the scene into a baggie, contacted the detective, explained the situation, and sent them to him. He said he would look into it. As it turns out, the DNA on the butts matched the DNA from a coffee mug on the desk of Officer Ragnar, and it was a match. With probable cause, they searched his apartment one night before he ever knew he was being investigated, and they found photos of Evan and several other men who went missing, all with Sodom written or carved somewhere in their flesh. Dead to rights. I don't know the background of the other men or what happened to them, but I do know he is a devout Catholic and has a history around the station and town as incredibly brutish and homophobic. I would never apply this to Christians in general, but this man is a monster. The trial begins this May. It was the best gift I could have ever given Evan. I still have nightmares, and so does he. But I also have another, reoccurring dream. A dream of those 2 bunnies, chasing each other through the forest. And Evan is there, watching them with me at his side. This happened about 20 years ago when I was around 10 years old, but it has always stuck with me. Myself and my 2 best friends used to hang out in this small wooded area, not too far from one of my friends' houses, about 2 minutes away. One particular day we were sitting on some rocks, doing the 10-year-old thing, making jokes and just being kids. Now from where we were sitting, which was quite high up, you could actually see down past this gully, which leads onto a housing estate with a field next to it. We noticed 3 boys over by the field. They were far away enough that we couldn't make them out exactly, but I would have guessed they were around 16, 17 years old, judging from how tall they were. Then all of a sudden, we hear one of them shouting, "Get them!" And they instantly started sprinting up the gully towards us. Now let me tell you, I have never been so scared in my life, and immediately our flight response kicked in. We all started running in an absolute panic. I was at the back and was convinced I was about to get grabbed from behind. We had to run through quite a rough terrain to get out onto the main path of the wooded area, and it was full of uneven rocks and nettles. We knew that the boys were just about far enough away to not catch us though, just as long as we were quick enough to make it to my friend's house before they could see us. So we kept running as fast as we could until we made it to the path at the back of my friend's house. We had to jump over a 6-foot fence to get into her garden, and we hid behind the shed. About 20 seconds later, the 3 boys ran straight past, so they obviously hadn't seen us jump over. The relief was immense, and we burst into hysterics of simultaneous tears and laughter. I honestly don't know what was going to happen to us, but at that moment it really felt that they were going to kill us. I guess realistically they were probably just teenage boys trying to scare us, but I do often wonder what would have happened if we hadn't started to run as quickly as we did. So I just woke up in the woods. I have no idea where I am or how I got here, but one thing is for sure, there's no need to panic. Actually, never mind, there is definitely a need to panic, because for some reason my foot is tied to a tree. Okay, I've managed to untie my foot. The last thing I can remember is going to sleep last night after painting for a little while. I was painting a fictional creature. What was it? I think it was a Wendigo. A Wendigo, yeah. Look, guys, listen. Something is out here with me. I heard something shifting. What if it's a Wendigo? It's gonna eat me. Oh my god, here it comes. Oh, never mind, it was just a fox. The little guy ran as soon as he saw me. So cute. Ooh, I found something. It's a journal. Let me read it to you. December 10th, 2020, 9:38 a.m. I seem to have woken up in the middle of the woods with no memory of how I got here. I wonder where here is. My foot appears to be tied to a tree, and that is a little alarming. The last thing I can confidently recall, though, is going to sleep. I think the best idea right now would be to find a source of fresh water and shelter for today. I think the only way to do that is to go downhill. The forest slopes eastward, so that's the direction I will head. After walking for a short time, I came across a large pond, and it appeared to have fish in it. That's good news. I think I can try to spear them and cook them over a fire. I only have my pocket knife, so I will have to carve the spear from a long stick. But shelter is my main goal right now. There is a large rock in a thick copse of trees on the opposite shore of the pond, so I walked over and observed the surrounding foliage. It looked like grass and clovers, both of which are not harmful to humans, so this spot will work. It's sheltered from the wind and in very close proximity to a clean water source. I'll work on gathering reeds and sticks to make more of a shelter, and I'll keep you posted. December 10th, 2020, 6:24 p.m. So I've built a roof and 2 walls protruding from the boulder. The boulder sufficing for a 3rd wall, leaving 1 empty wall for me to enter and exit the shelter. Now I'm going to work on building a fire. I'll lay it about 1 meter from the entrance of the shelter, so I can stay warm, but I can enter and exit as I please. I gathered a large stack of small twigs and large logs, and a few handfuls of dry grass, and made a circle of stones around where I will build the fire, so that it stays contained. I carved a dent in the middle of the stones too, so the ashes and charcoal stay within them and don't fly away. I rubbed a twig against a log and a handful of dried grass. It can take a few tries and a couple of breaks, but I finally managed to get a fire going. It's getting pretty dark now, so the last thing I will do today is carve the spear. See you later. December 11th, 2020, 7:02 a.m. It's now morning. Yesterday I made a lot of progress. Today's goal is food. I have already made my spear, rolled up my pant legs, and I've tied my hair back with a reed. I walked down to the pond, the sun barely risen, but I think that now would be a good time to start fishing. I wade in up past my calves and ready my spear. I will update you later as this might take a while. December 11th, 2020, 4:23 p.m. I spent until noon trying to catch a fish. Then I took a break to restart the fire. That took a while too. Then I gathered more firewood, went back to trying to spear some fish, and they were a bit difficult to catch, so I decided to try catching something a bit easier. After a while I managed to catch a rabbit, so then I skinned it. It was nasty as I had to gut it, but now it's cooking on a spit over my fire, and it doesn't look so bad. I made the spit with 2 forked branches and a second spear. It won't be the tastiest meal, but it'll be something at least. There isn't much meat though. I'm just hoping the fire attracts someone to come here and find me, so I think I'll put another layer of branches on the roof of the shelter. Good night. December 12th, 2020, 1:56 a.m. There is something out here with me. Something big. I thought it was a deer as I saw some antlers, but it's no deer. That thing is nothing like what anyone has seen before. It's a man with a deer's head, with its antlers being absolutely massive. I need to be more quiet from now on and keep the fire small. It might lower my chances of someone seeing the smoke, but at least it could keep me alive. I will have to find a way out of here on my own soon. Wish me luck on sleeping. December 13th, 2020, 1:25 p.m. I didn't sleep at all the last 2 nights. It seems that whatever this monster is, it only shows up at night. So I think I'll hunt at sunrise, eat, and then sleep during the day. If there is a city nearby, then the lights will be easier to spot by night anyway. I will put the fire out at night so that it doesn't attract the monster. Right now I have eaten and gathered firewood for tomorrow, so now I will try to rest. Good night, reader. Or good afternoon, should I say. December 13th, 2020, 8:24 p.m. The moon is out, so I have put out the fire and grabbed my spear. Time to explore. I'll head back west, I think, as because that's where I initially woke up. I'll see if I recognize anything and then head whichever way I feel most comfortable. I'll update you later. December 14th, 2020, 6:49 a.m. It's now sunrise, and I spent all night looking. Once I'd gotten to the place I'd woken up in, I looked around and didn't recognize anything, so I headed south. Don't ask me why, it was just a gut feeling I had. I then walked for about 10 miles when I spotted it. I was standing at the top of a hill, the trees towering all around me, and I saw the sparks, lights in the distance. A town. Oh my God, a town. It was heavenly, as if the gods had descended all on one spot, and their lights glowed fervently in the darkness of the night, a beacon calling me to them. But regretfully, that euphoric state was short-lived. The monster quickly appeared, its gnarly antlers nodding in my direction. Then with deadly precision, it charged me. I turned and ran faster than I'd ever run before, and once I made it to the spot I woke up, it seemed to have disappeared. I ran back to my shelter, and by then I was out of breath. I collapsed, heaving, and I rolled down the hill to the pond and took huge gulps of water. Once my stomach was full, I turned on my side and spewed out everything I'd just taken in. The second time I drank from the pond, I drank slower, and I drank less, just so as to retain anything I'd consumed. I sat in my shelter for a while, and by then I could barely make out the sun's rays on the horizon, which brings me to where I am now. It's time to go to sleep. Tomorrow night we make more spears, and the night after that we make a break for the town. I feel that I probably won't make it, so if anyone finds this journal, head to the town in daylight. I will leave it at the place that I woke up. Good night. December 15th, 2020, 7:34 a.m. It's time. Yesterday I made a stack of spears and weaved a long quiver for them from the reeds. The quiver would strap onto my back so that I can easily grab a spear. The sun is in sight now. It's time to go. A long and dangerous journey lays before me. I have to leave the journal now. Goodbye, reader. Well, that wasn't quite what I expected to read, but I think I will go look for the shelter that the writer had built. Downhill did appear to be east, shockingly. After walking for about 10 minutes, I found the pond and the shelter, and there was the circle of rocks, a stash of firewood, and the pocket knife that the writer had said they had. I figured I may as well try to build a fire. No, I should carve a few spears first. After rummaging around in the forest for a while, it turned out that the writer was wrong. The creature does walk around during the day. It seems to walk around the shadiest parts of the forest, and I think it is afraid of the light. So day does seem like the best option to make a break for the city, but it's still dangerous. I could die. It just hit me. I'm going to die out here, and I'm going to die all alone. Nobody will ever know what happened, and nobody will ever know what was out here. No, I need to focus. Okay, it's sunset. I've carved about 8 spears and weaved a bundle around them so I can strap them to my back, just like the writer did. It's probably a really bad bundle, though. I'm sitting and trying not to fall asleep. Who knows what could happen if I do? Better not to think about that right now, though. I'm really bored. I can see the first few lights of dawn, so just a little more time, then I should be able to head out. I can see the sun now. I think I will also leave the journal where I woke up, just in case. It's time to go now, spear in shaky hand. I dropped the journal by the rope my foot was tied into, and I set off south. Just like the writer had said, it was going to be a long walk. About an hour in, and luckily nothing has happened so far. I think I can see the hill that the writer was talking about. I can just barely make it out on the horizon. Yes, this is great. Okay, well, the hill was a bit further than I'd originally anticipated. I did manage to scale it. I can see the city now. It has a few skyscrapers, but it isn't massive. There should be someone who can help me there. The sun is directly above me in the sky, and it's a bit too hot out for my liking. My whole body is drenched in sweat, but I think I'll keep going and hope that I can make it to the city by nightfall. So it's about 6 p.m, I would say. Minor issue. The monster seems to be waiting for me. It keeps following me through the forest, but it stays in the shadows. Now I have to make it to the city by nightfall. I started to jog. I can see the city sprawling out before me now. Unfortunately for me, though, the sun has just set and the creature is about 400 feet in front of me. It charged me, but I managed to evade it and make a run for it. It tripped, stumbled, got back up and charged me again. The antlers on the thing are for sure going to give me an infection, as they just stabbed me in about 3 different places in my back, my left and right ribs, and a huge gash along my side. The blood is just pouring out of me now, but I think I can make it. I'm still running towards the city. The creature thankfully backed off as soon as I set foot there. I've made it, and that thing seems to be confined to the woods. I hammered on the first friendly-looking door that I came across and collapsed into the arms of the woman who opened the door. She looked at me with fear, curiosity, but mostly worry, and with no questions asked, she drove me straight to the hospital. I was safe at last, and I am never going into the woods again. Ever. Have you ever watched the snow fall in the winter season? Of course you have, since most people have seen snow either in December, January or February, and if you're unlucky, March too. If you give the snow enough time, you can make footprints in it. The deeper it is, the more apparent footprints are from a distance. Snow makes it easy to see what's been walking around in your yard when you're not there. When you have no neighbours or roads, and you have a good view from your house, footprints become less pleasing to see. It makes your heart drop in the first few seconds of seeing them in these situations, and it's best to have a gun at all times. I'd recommend a shotgun, since there's no need to be perfectly accurate with your aim. Now, with most footprints that you come across, they will be an animal, like a fox, coyote, deer, and possibly a bear. Sometimes you might mistake your footprints for a stranger's footprint when forgetting where you've been walking. Snow at times makes you see things that aren't real though too, like a deer-headed man, for instance. So at times it's better not to scan the yard for new footprints, as it always ends up being a waste of time. Though most footprints can be explained, it's the shadows in a blizzard that put fear into many. Even if it's a dog or a human, the blizzard alters the figure and muffles the voice in exchange for the howling wind. What or who would brave a blizzard in the middle of the woods? No animal nor sane person would walk in a blizzard unless they wanted to get lost. It's possible that it could be a bush in the distance, but I'd never go and see for myself. This is why you must always carry a gun, just in case there is a real danger. But do be careful not to shoot at just anything. After all, blizzards make you see things that aren't there, like deer-headed men. Nighttime also only makes the snowfall more dangerous, as it not only makes the forest ever more terrifying, but the snow can trigger the porch lights, and at times, when the lights are triggered, new footprints can be found. Any footprints further away are hidden by the dark and the falling snow, and this can make nature feel like your worst enemy. The house begins feeling like a box being drowned by the snow and the night. When the porch lights are triggered, the impulse of grabbing a weapon comes immediately. Remember though, that the lights are only being triggered by snow, so don't take a gun out unless you are sure it's real danger, especially if the snow makes you see things, like a deer-headed man. How many of you have an event from your past that you can't ever forget? Something that terrified you to the point of pure primal fear, but is so far-fetched and impossible that you begin questioning your mind's credibility. For me, that event happened 10 years ago, in the woods of Somerset. I was about 15 when these events took place. I'm not going to lie, I consumed a lot of horror media growing up. I would stay up all night watching Nightmare on Elm Street. I absolutely adored all types of horror media, and so did my friends. One type of horror that always struck a chord with us were the investigation shows. Ghost Hunters, Destination Truth, Scariest Places on Earth, etc. I remember my friend Mark's dad was real big into paranormal investigation, and that kind of fueled the flames. We all wanted to grow up and explore the world, investigating all kinds of abandoned buildings, hidden unknown creatures and entities. We would be better than all of those shows, because unlike them, when it hit the fan we would stand our ground and take on whatever came our way. But the worldwide adventure would have to be on hold, considering we were literal children. But that never broke our resolve though. Now Mark's dad had the works: EMF detectors, night vision cameras with thermal readings, high and audio recorders, all of it. He also had several firearms. Not like a crazy amount, but enough for personal protection and home defense. We all referred to Mark's dad as the Batman of ghost hunting, because he always seemed to have the right tool for every situation. He even had one of the magazines for his pistol loaded with silver bullets, just in case. He would take us along with him to a lot of his investigations, to local cemeteries and places with a haunted reputation. We all felt like we were really doing it. This was just a stepping stone for our lives to become the adventure book we all thought it was going to be. Sorry for all the background for the event, but I just wanted you all to understand the mindset we were all in to get us to make the stupid choices that we did. Now, Mark's place was the place to be back then. We would spend days at his place hanging out, playing games and watching TV to our heart's desire. One of the weekends, we had the house to ourselves and it was great. It was Mark, Chuck, Danny, Brendan and myself. We were trying to kill as much time as we could, waiting for night to fall. You see, one of the most beautiful things about Somerset were the woods. Somerset did have a little centre town where it faked a sense of being an actual city, but once you got out of the 2 miles worth of city, you all of a sudden dropped off the face of the world. Somerset is about 11 square miles large, and I guarantee you that most of that is woods. Some of it is Lake Cumberland, but most of it is woods. When we were at Mark's place, we were about 20 minutes from the next house. Like I said, dropped off the face of the world. 10 years ago, the night finally fell over Somerset. This was finally our time. Our stupid, edgy 15-year-old time. We had been waiting for night to come, because we were going to go explore the woods out behind Mark's house. We were all armed with our flashlights, water bottles, and all of us had knives of some capacity. Mark had also brought some of his guns, just in case. He had a 12-gauge pump shotgun. It maybe had 6 shells in it at best. Chuck had a .22 rifle that had a very wimpy single-round capacity, and I had a .22 6-shot revolver. In Somerset, being the backwoods town that it wasn't uncommon to see someone toting around firearms all over the place. Now, it wasn't super common to have 15-year-olds carrying guns, but it would happen from time to time. Plus, we were on private property, so in our minds it was okay. Like I said, we were stupid kids. Once we were all geared up, it was time for our adventure. As soon as we entered the woods, there was an uneasy tension in the air. The crickets and other wildlife in the area sounded active, which was a good sign. We weren't sure just yet as to what it was that made us feel off, but we would soon find out. We were about 15 minutes in when we found the bridge. This bridge was an old rickety wooden thing that went across a steep trench that was probably about 15 feet deep, that went on for at least 50 to 70 feet before twisting around the hills out of sight. Not exactly a canyon, but it was definitely not something we wanted to go down into. If I did, it would be a pain in the ass to get back up, and there didn't seem like an easy way to get back up anyway. We decided to take a quick break while we were there. We set up a small perimeter with a lantern from our pack. We really didn't have any plan on just how long we were going to be out there, so we decided to set up a small campfire and just hang out until it was time to continue. Chuck, Danny, Mark and Brendan were relaxing and chatting with each other, so I decided to keep watch. I was walking around the perimeter we had set up, shining my flashlight around the woods surrounding us. As I was walking, I noticed something strange. I heard the crunching of leaves under my feet, and I'm sure someone would say, "So what?" But that's just it. That's all I heard. Other than the few words here and there from my friends, I heard nothing else. The woods were dead silent. As soon as I noticed the silence, I drew the revolver from its holster. Whatever good the .22 was going to do to what I thought was nearby. I continued to shine my flashlight around, trying to remain calm. But then the beam shined onto something just at the edge of the hill. Something just barely peeking over the edge of the trench. Something that I couldn't quite make out with just the light. But after a few moments of adjusting, I finally could make out what it was. But I wish that I hadn't. The thing's white skin was reflecting the beam from the flashlight, but I could make out a vaguely human-shaped head. Its dark eyes seemed to absorb the light, leaving just soulless voids staring daggers at me. I was frozen in place, locked in eye contact with this creature. Then its head disappeared back into the trench. As soon as I was released from its gaze, I turned back to my friends and tried as quietly as I could to get their attention, but they didn't seem to notice me. They were too enveloped in conversation, probably about something stupid as usual. So after mustering as much sound as I could, I called out, "Hey!" The crack of my voice echoed through the now silent woods. They all whipped their heads back to me, startled by the sudden sound. After a moment, I finally recollected myself and slowly but frantically pointed out to the trench where I saw the thing. "There's something in the ditch," I barely forced out. With that, the rest of my friends quickly got up and drew what weapons they had. All of us frantically searching the edge of the ditch with our guns, trained on the spot. After a few moments of our desperate searching, we finally noticed the thing peek up again, about 10 feet closer than it had previously been. It was peeking just slightly more than it was before. My friends, now caught in the same trance as its voids of eyes, stared quickly, moving from one of us to the other. For a moment it almost looked like it didn't have a mouth. Then we all saw as its tongue came out of a small slit in its face, almost seeming to lick its lips at us. We all stood in that same frozen shock as the thing quickly dipped back down into the trench. It came back up again, another 10 feet closer. It was coming closer to us. I can't remember who yelled to run, but I remember all of us running like maniacs back towards Mark's house. So much for standing our ground. I found myself close to the front right behind Chuck. We ran for what felt like forever, and as we ran for what we believed was our lives, I heard Danny and Brendan screaming. I can't remember what it was they were saying. My ears were ringing and my lungs were burning. After we finally made it back to Mark's house, seeing it was the closest feeling to salvation I've ever experienced. We all practically dived into the door, quickly locking it behind us. After we were finally clear, we all kept our guns trained on the doors and exits, fueled only by adrenaline. It had to have been hours that we all stood with our weapons in our hands, just hoping that the creature wouldn't try to enter the house. Once morning finally came, we were all exhausted. I don't think I was the first person to pass out, but I know I was the last person to wake up. Everyone else was sitting quietly in the living room. It took hours before we decided to talk about what had happened. Danny and Brendan explained that we were running, and they could hear heavy footsteps running behind them. We couldn't rationalize what it was that we'd seen, so we all decided not to talk about it to anyone else. Again, a stupid decision, I know, but we were all terrified teenagers. We also decided that we were never going out into the woods behind Mark's house again. I never did go back out to those woods, and our investigation team plans unfortunately fell apart. We all moved to different places later in our life and slowly grew apart. The only people I really keep in contact with anymore are Chuck and Mark, but I haven't seen either of them in years. There are many things that I question when I look back at that night. What it could have been. Why couldn't we move? Was it just some animal that looked monstrous in the light? But the thing that always confuses me is how it moved. It just kept bobbing up and down out of the 15-foot trench. I don't know how it could have kept climbing up and down, unless it was just ducking. I'm Luke, born on May 1st, 2005, and strange things have been happening in my neighbourhood recently. For more context, I live in a heavily wooded area with my 3 dogs, Gina, Blake, and Cream. I also live with my little sister Lily, who's 10, and my little brother Jake, who's 8, and my mum and dad as well. We also have a cat called Lucky, who I found as a kitten. We live in a small town in Massachusetts. The internet is surprisingly great, and the neighbours are around a 5-minute walk from any direction. I live in a 3-story wooden house that's heated with wood. We chop our wood from the woods as we own around 5 miles of property, so I, as the oldest sibling of 3, have to chop down trees for our firewood. Now this all started 4 days ago, when my father asked me to go get some wood from the forest, as we needed some more. I took the tractor and my axe out to the woods and started to cut down some trees. As I was doing it though, I felt like I was being watched. Like that surreal feeling you get when you're a child alone in a dark room after you accidentally watched a scary movie and you're alone with your imagination. So because of this, I quickly loaded up the wood and headed back to our not-so-little house. As I was chopping the wood into smaller pieces for the fireplace, my friend Lincoln called me, and I picked up knowing the familiar ringtone I had set for him. "Hey dude, what's up?" I asked. "Nothing, just wanted to know if you were still coming to ride your dirt bike with me and the others." A large smile swept my face as I remembered our plans for tomorrow. "Of course," I said. "All right, man, see you tomorrow then." And before I could say anything else, he hung up. "Weird," I said, and I grabbed some wood and headed inside, Lily opening the door for me. "Thanks, Lil," I said. "You're welcome," she sang excitedly, as Jake grasped her arm nervously. "Lily, Lily," the 8-year-old said. "I saw the weird deer thing again." Lily, seemingly ignoring our little brother's desperate pleas for us to look outside, said, "Dad's making lamb chops." "Cool," I said, placing the wood in the fire and glancing over to Jake, who now had detached himself from Lily's arm and walked over to the large window, pointing to the woods in the backyard. "What is it, buddy?" I questioned. "Deer man!" he yelled. "He's been doing that since you left," my mum interrupted from the kitchen, hollering deer man, and pointing to the woods. "Oh, he's got a wild imagination, Lucy," my dad said, sitting down in his chair. "Need any help in the kitchen, Mum?" I asked, trying to bribe her into letting me go with my friends to the field tomorrow. "Actually, no," my mum said, "but you could do the laundry." "All right," I said, going up the stairs. Jake and Lily followed me as I grabbed the laundry out of the hampers in each room and headed back down the stairs. As I arrived in the laundry room, the large window facing the woods, Jake screamed again. "Deer man, deer man!" I turned to see what he was looking at, only to see 2 glowing yellow eyes staring back at me. "Holy crap," I muttered, rushing Jake into the kitchen. "Mum?" "Yes, honey?" my mum asked, concerned. "Mum, something is in the woods. Both me and Jake saw it," I said, panicked. "Oh, honey, it's just a bobcat. We get plenty of those," my mother said, her concerns gathering. The dogs were going crazy, and Lucky ran under the sofa, tail fluffed in fear. "Mum, the eyes were at least 7 foot in the air." "Then it's a moose. Now set the table," my mother said, done with me at this point. After a silent dinner of lamb, mashed potatoes and peas, we all sat down for our nightly storytelling. My family practices witchcraft, or paganism to put it simply, but we also believe in wendigos. My mother not so much, but my father decided to tell the story of his encounter with one that night, or at least his father who had in the past, years before my birth. After my father finished his story of my grandfather's bravery and daring escape, I took my siblings to their rooms and put them to bed. "Don't let the deer man get me, Luke," Jake pleaded. "The deer man can't get you. How about we burn some sage tomorrow, eh?" I said, trying to calm him down. "That gets rid of bad things, right?" he asked. "Yeah, buddy, now go to bed," I said, smiling and turning off his light. As I walked downstairs planning on what and how to ask my parents to go out with my friends, I stared at the head of a deer that my father had shot when I was 12. Its glossy eyes forever fixed on one spot, it had a cold, icy stare and a soft brown pelt. I shuddered. "Mom?" I asked nervously. "Yes, Luke?" "Can I hang out with Lincoln and the others tomorrow?" I said, stepping into the living room. "Sure," my mother said. "Although why?" I felt the warmth of one of the dogs as I looked down to see Gina staring up at me, hoping for treats. "We want to ride dirt bikes out in the woods at Evans," I said calmly. "All right, just keep your phone on," my mother said. I nodded, popping down on the sofa next to Blake and Cream, and Lucky sat on my lap, purring as me and my parents watched a documentary on Netflix. Birds are beautiful creatures. I love woodpeckers for some reason. They're really cool, and their entire tongue can fit around their skull. I went up to bed, Lucky trotting behind me. My room was on the 3rd floor, and I flipped into bed, Lucky following suit. "Hey, buddy," I said. She meowed at me, and I replied with, "Same here." I quickly fell asleep, not noticing the tapping on my window as I drifted away into a deep slumber. Hey there, it's me again, Miss Fearsome. I hope you enjoyed my video. If you did, then please hit that subscribe button. And if you'd like to support me further, please check out my Patreon and sign up for as little as $1 a month. So until next time, stay happy, stay safe, and remember, keep being creepy.